Now look at verse 44. And he said unto them, this is Jesus, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was yet with you, that all the things must be fulfilled that were written in the law of Moses, in the prophets, and in the Psalms about me. Verse 45 is very important. Then opened he their understanding that they might understand the scriptures. So verse 45 says that the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms are the scriptures. So let's walk again. Let's think about these things for just a little bit. I know that the church is in the New Testament, and it is a New Testament church. But the question becomes, how important is the Old Testament to the New Covenant? It's vital. I did not know how vital it was, but that was a major part of the last section of my journey that solidified for me that our issues, I guess, within the church is that we don't study the Old Testament. Consider this passage from Peter. It says here in 1 Peter, chapter 1, verse 25. Now let's go back up. Verse 23. Being born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of God. By the word of God. That's talking about the Torah and the prophets, which lives and abides forever. For all flesh is grass, all the glory of man as a flower of grass. The grass withers, the flower thereof falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. When we keep in context what's going on with these people, Peter is not talking about the words of Jesus alone. He is talking about the words of Yahweh, of God, who had given it first through Moses, that this is what lives forever. And in verse 25 it says, and this is the word by which the gospel is preached to you. The word. That means that our first brothers and sisters in the church preached solely from the books of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms, or the rest of the Old Testament for the gospel. I have a challenge. When was the last time we used the Old Testament to present the gospel? Because that's where the gospel comes from. The Old Testament is not against us in any way. It is actually very powerful for us. Let us walk again. Let us consider what this means. I was given the idea, I don't know if this was the best way to express it, but I was given the idea that the New Testament is the only thing that I need in order to understand Jesus, understand the church, and to understand what to do. But as I was studying covenant, context, culture, it became evidently clear to me, manifestly clear, that the first church, which is in Jerusalem, because that's where the day of Pentecost occurs, that church uses the Old Testament over and over and over and over and over and over to prove not only Jesus, but to instruct the church. When I became fully aware of this, I started to rethink the scriptures. I was confronted about this. But I know that the Old Testament has its truth. It has its validity to the New Covenant. Herein lies the dilemma. Is the church to be without the Old Testament? And that answer is a profound no. Let me give you the best example that seems to have come to mind. The Word of God is the foundation. The Word of God, being the Old Testament, is the foundation for everything. And the first foundation is Torah, because it was given to Moses at Sinai. So it sets a foundation. We'll kind of do it like this. Now, what we have with that foundation is we have a pillar that comes in, and it all leads to the Messiah. And then we have another pillar that's given on the day of Pentecost, and it's the Spirit. So what we have is kind of a triangle. Now, if you take away the Word of God, you have no foundation. What you have is simply Jesus leaning against the Spirit. But Jesus and the Spirit cannot work without working in harmony with God. And this is the Old Testament down here, first founded by Moses, established through Moses by God. Jesus is the fulfillment of grace. And this, the Spirit, leads us into all truth and still provides us comfort. This is the power. And without that base, we don't have that strength. We have to reestablish this base in the church and understand how important it is. And I'm asking you to think about these things, because this is what I have been led to. This is just a constant study of the New Testament, where it says the Scriptures and all these things. So I will close out by looking at one passage from Paul